Hold on 1 second. Elijah, can you go downstairs, please?
You know what we really need is a producer.
Hmm. Who can? Holly will probably do it.
Yeah, but do you think she'd legitimately cut stuff out or anything, or she'd be like, "You guys are great."
I think she probably cut stuff out. I
Oh,
would
okay.
assume.
All right. So you want to talk about? Go for it.
So I figured our second podcast will kind of be a little more about the basics. Like we would cover, the basic structure of a PowerShell command. The verb dash noun syntax with the dash dash parameters, I believe. That's one thing I wanted to cover. Also, one of the things I wanted to cover was the help. I think the help is real useful. Me and Thad had a conversation about this a little bit yesterday, and we have slightly conflicting opinions about help. I would
I
say,
don't think these are conflicting opinions. I think what they are is, and I've thought about this since we had that conversation. I think it's more a matter of, all right, we'll get to it. Hold on. Before I get on my soapbox, we'll get to it. But yeah, so like, oh no, we don't want that. So yeah, so start talking about your basics. I don't want to be the mouthpiece here. Go for it.
okay, so the basics. So I think first thing we should cover is the how is a PowerShell command structured? Not making your own, but what comes from Microsoft in PowerShell, right? So like usually you can run commands like get dash content, get dash member, which in my opinion, both of those commands are really useful when you start to do your scripts and you're trying to check to see what an object is, or you're just trying to maybe you want to read a text file inside the PowerShell console. You would run like get dash command, and so if you would notice, for those who just starting off with PowerShell, um, most of these commands are in a verb dash noun format, and that's just how Microsoft decided to do that. And it's helpful because it helps you identify what those are. And you already know going down the line, if I want to use a command from a module that is either made by Microsoft or already came with PowerShell, it's going to have that verb dash noun syntax. So using that knowledge, you can almost get around like exactly what are you trying to accomplish. So you can try to do I want to get a Active Directory user's information. You will run, so most Active Directory commands come with like a get dash ad something. So you can run like a get dash help or get dash command and then get dash ad star, and you would get like every Active Directory command that has get dash ad in it. And that's real helpful when you're looking for things. But another thing, I mean, I don't. What do you think about that? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's better ways to do that, of course.
No, it's perfectly fine to me. We're talking about beginners here, and I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of things I've forgotten over the years. And while you're talking, like I'm sitting here thinking, man, I get annoyed. I'm using VS Code, and when you use VS Code, um, when you make functions, whether for a module, whether within the script itself, one of the things it does is it keeps complaining that I'm either A, not using an appropriate verb action,
Yes.
uh, or that I haven't I haven't formatted it right correctly. So, I have, and I was, I just you after a while, you've been doing this for a while, you have your own naming conventions, especially if you learned before things like VS Code were around. Um, you just like automatically you go, oh, I have one script and it's putting data up to SharePoint. And so I called one of the functions involved in this push to dash SharePoint, to which VS Code just has this nice little squiggly line saying like this is not appropriate. And all I wanted to do is curse the people who put that in place. Um, and then I decided I'm just going to thumb my nose at them. So screw you, developers.
You know,
Granted, I am one of those, but now,
but I think though, like you probably could have simply fixed it by doing like a push dash to whatever, and then it
yeah,
probably would have been properly formatted for VS Code at least.
yeah, but I guess I, you know, like I said, I've been doing this a long time, and there are better people than me out there who are just going to do the right thing. Um, and
I think when it
yeah,
comes to
I
doing,
don't be like me. I think a lot of people who've worked with me know that my first statement is don't be like me. Um, for uh, and I'm saying this because I've got thousands of scripts that I've written. I've got modules all over the place that I've written. And, when you're sitting there going like, what am I going to name this function? And early on, you're you're going to stop and think about this, right? Like, you know, uh, and the Microsoft naming scheme for these things, like the most common, get, add, set, remove, right? Those are the most common things, right?
right?
Um, then you have things like convert to,
Yep.
which is less common, right? So the idea of me saying push to, when I'm looking at this history of naming schemes and I see, oh, convert to, push to is a fair thing to do, right? There's
Right.
no push dash it. So me saying like push to is fair. And somebody may say like, well, you can call it set SharePoint or add dash SharePoint or whatever, right? Like you can change it to follow some norm. And in all honesty, the, the verb I chose was the appropriate verb for what this function does. Right?
I mean, and yeah, and like you said, there is actually. Let me see if I can find it. There
and
is
and I
a
will say
list
this as I'm
of.
saying this, there's if you go through TechNet Gallery, you will see tons of people have written modules or written scripts, and they created functions within those things that are not following those norms either. Like what what Visual Studio Code will complain about still exists in a lot of those things. And I'm not trying to insult the people who are writing for putting stuff up to TechNet Gallery. In fact, I much applaud them because they've saved my life 100 times. Why haven't I put anything up to TechNet Gallery? Because I do bad things. Um, no, I don't. It's things that over the years, I haven't spent time going like, let me write the whole, bit of header, synopsis, help, et cetera, et cetera. I don't spend time putting that stuff in. And that's usually because I'm writing stuff that's been always used internally and making my code available. There's restrictions because I've been in um, companies that are very strict about code. and
Yeah.
sharing code. Um,
Yeah. Be
and that's been
secure.
the case for my entire PowerShell life. So and then some, right? So for 12 years, that's what it's been. Is that a problem to me? No, I think a lot of people who are listening to this are probably working in places that are, where there is some sense of propriety, even though we're, as sysadmins, there's probably a lot of stuff where we're going like, yeah, the guy over there is doing the exact same thing that I am, right? We're not doing anything secretive, right? We Googled and we came up with we got to the same people, right? When you can Google it, right? I think, in our January meeting, we talked about the Team City thing, and we talked about um, what's the other thing? Oh, the Office, splitting of instances. Those two things didn't have Googling answers, so um, but I'm sure that there's probably somebody else that's evolved the one of those solutions and is very similar, right? It's not it you know it's not secretive, but anyways, I don't want to spend time on secrecy and work, but the short answer is like, um you know a lot of us who've been coding for a long time in PowerShell, there's no there weren't rules for a long time, and we were all just figuring it out, and we created rules when there weren't any, and now we have our own rules. And the newer people should probably be better than us and follow the rules.
Absolutely. Well,
Now that
in
there's
some
better
sense.
definition, now that there's better definition, but I think some people may also know, like, some of the newer modules, um, they change things too, right? Some of the commandlets, you're gonna go dash property to get details, or dash properties to get details. Um,
What's the
you know,
saying? The devil is in the detail.
I guess, yeah. I guess, uh, I guess this is like Android, where there's a bit of fracturing as the platform has evolved and other people have gotten involved and built things around the platform. Um, Fragmentation. Sorry, I said fracturing. I meant fragmentation, right? And people try to follow these rules, and it's always a little. You get these little quirks, right? So, anyways, go on, because I'm getting all.
It's all good. But there is a way to get a list of approved verbs for PowerShell. If you run the get dash verb command, it'll show you a list of approved verbs in PowerShell, and it also has a category as well. I believe is that the category, the group. It's part of a group, so it's like common and security data stuff like that. Um, so that's one in my opinion, but you don't have to, of course. But I would kind of follow the same kind of rules that Microsoft does, where you follow that same syntax, where you're doing the verb dash now, and then in addition to you setting up your commands or your functions or whatever in the same way, you'll get used to using PowerShell in that way, in my opinion. But of course, we know when you write in PowerShell scripts and everything, you don't have to follow those commands. Like, we've even written the script to kind of follow that same syntax, so you could just call that script in the same format and way. So, it kind of helps out to me, helps identify what this is. I know this is a PowerShell script, but just looking at the name, I know that it's going to do this. Like, when you're naming your scripts, like when you're naming your functions, and when you're naming your variables, parameters, whatever, you want to kind of be as descriptive as possible, so what do you have right there. So um, I kind of like to follow the commands, but I don't like you when it comes to the push. I don't always follow the approved verb, but
Mhm.
majority of the time I try to. So
I think the audience matters, right? Um, the audience and the author matter, right? Where you can take some liberties here because it's what makes sense for who's going to be making use of it, and it's descriptive. And if that description varies, then it's okay, right? I'm not saying don't do verb dash, but I'm just saying like come up with something. I will say my early scripts didn't have verb dash. Uh, They just were called things. And I have actually a function, send mail, that I use in so many things. And it, there's no dash. And I have not changed it at all in
I mean, that's just one of those things. It is what it is. It's there. It's working.
yeah, I've reused it like 1,000 times and it's never changed.
Yeah, I definitely
Um,
I feel that. It's like if I don't really want to mess with it if it's already like this because you already done incorporated this into 1,000 other scripts, and you're like now you make one change and there's a chance that you could break another script somewhere else depending on how you have everything set up. So I can understand that for sure.
yeah.
Um, and also, I would one thing as well for those who just starting with PowerShell. Usually, like if you follow like tutorials or whatever, like be it through Microsoft or YouTube, some guy teaching PowerShell from his basement or whatever. They usually tell you to start off with updating your help, and this is where we kind of little part of ways, not nothing super crazy, but I don't utilize it as enough, like the get dash help, and then you put in a command. So like you do like we'll go back to the active directory command. So you do like get dash help, then get dash ad user, and it'll bring up the help for that command. Now, in most cases, it will bring up help, but not all the commands have a help for them, even if you update help. So, like, you still have to go to the Microsoft website and look just to find out, what does this command do?
And this is where I was starting to have my moment with you, right? Which is uh, I don't dislike help. Okay. In fact, for my first year learning PowerShell, I just kept using help. After my first year, I started running into issues which were help's not telling me how to do this, right? And then you start Googling, and maybe somebody's got the answer, right? And I'll take this moment to, we'll say, I'm going to share my screen, but I know people who are listening to this are going to not see this, but they'll understand if they do a Google search, right? So I Google searched set-ad user. Okay, a very common command for those doing AD work, right? Okay, very straightforward. Now, if you do get help and you do set AD user, you'll get a lot of things, right? Like set AD user dash identity, blah 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 blah, right? So, uh, where I get frustrated is some parts of like set AD user don't play the same way. And I think that when you talk about get help and when you talk about something like set AD user, this is a big deal. And I wrote something not too long ago, and it was setting extension attributes. That wasn't something I had done in at all, right? Like just rarely use extension attributes, but to make changes to extension attributes it can be a multi-step process, right? So like looking at this set AD user um, screen, and you guys can Google this and go to Microsoft Docs and see this, right? And at no point in any of this does it mention um, um, extension attributes. And why is this important? Because you can't just go and say set AD user identity, whatever user's name is, and like dash extension attribute 1 and put a value. You can't. There is something here, you're looking at the Microsoft Docs page, and you do see example 4, and it gives you what this should look like, but it doesn't say that this is how you should use it for extension attributes, right? There's no mention of extension attributes at all on this page. And I think that's a big deal, because when you go in trying to do this work, right, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to do this extension attribute, blah, 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 right? You go through and you write a script that's going through and making these changes in AD, and it's a series of changes in AD, right? And then you keep running into this issue where the extension attribute's not being changed, or it's erroring out, and what's going on. And I think it does a disservice from the point of view of Microsoft. I understand from somebody makes something in TechNet, and then somebody uses their script in a way that they hadn't envisioned, which is pretty common. And they don't understand how to make that work. That's one thing. When it's Microsoft and they know the rules because they set the rules, then that's a whole different conversation. And I don't expect help to answer every question that comes up. I do expect something from Microsoft to kind of go like, hey, just a special note, when you're changing something for extension attributes, you have to do it this way. And I expect that. That's where I get frustrated with help. Now, help's great for like you're starting off. Help's great to get you going. You have to understand the limitations of help.
There are definitely limitations to help for sure. And I would also like to say, if you're new to PowerShell, do not set anything especially do not set AD anything. Do not do it. Talk to your
a professional.
Yeah, like because first, I have a few teammates that I work with right now who are in the process of learning PowerShell, and like one of the first things I tell them, do not set anything. Get objects and look at the object. Understand what you're doing. Like if you are going to get an AD user and you want to look at that AD user information, take that get dash AD user dash identity username and toss it into a variable. And then
what? This is what the what if flag is for. When you're doing these things, use what if. Use what
confirm.
if. Use what if. What if? Yeah, use confirm too. But what if, more importantly, because you can confirm it and it's still the wrong thing. But what if doesn't do anything?
Absolutely.
What if tells you what's going to happen? It won't do anything. You at least can see, did I get an error running this out? And if you don't, you're like, okay, this gives me a sense of it's working, right? But if you want to do confirm too with what if, then do that too. But Yeah. Yeah.
There's
You're doing
another
this
one.
for the first time. Don't do that. Don't set things.
There's another one other than
I
what
I
if.
think there was, yeah. Um
Because like there's like the standard ones that because I know what if dash confirm, those are like standard with almost all
mhm,
PowerShell commands. And
yeah.
then there's another one as well that will, it won't let you actually do it. And I sometimes I throw it in a place if I think it might have been what if. Yeah, sometimes I'll just throw it in a place just in case somebody else goes on a GitHub or whatever, and they see
Mhm.
my script, and they want to test out some of the commands or whatever, and this way, we don't do anything that, I mean, most of the stuff we probably could do can be reversed, but you don't want to throw a chink in the chain in the middle of production,
Uh,
shutting down random computers while people are
Although
trading.
I can't tell you how many times I've tested in prod. Don't do
Unfortunately,
that.
I think there's a common practice, unfortunately, and
Don't do that.
yeah.
I think it's hard. I think it's hard because a lot of people are coming into environments, and either the dev environment, UAT environment, is not well. How do I say this? It's not well configured, right? So, for instance, we're working in a place, and we do have like a UAT, um, SharePoint, UAT, AD environment, but we take the UAT AD environment, and it doesn't look anything like the the prod one, right? Where you have lots of deep OUs, um, and you may have a user who's who you're trying to, let's say you're creating a new user, and you want them to AD groups, match the AD groups that their coworkers on. You, that UAT environment just doesn't do that, especially when those groups get complicated. So, I mean, a group nested within a group nested within a group, and we can laugh about that, but we know that that's common, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, somebody who's listening is going like, who's in a group that's nested 3 or 4 levels in? Well, think about it like this, right? You have CIO, right? And you make a group that's like all the people that report to the CIO, like all the people underneath the CIO, right? And then within that, then you have like head of tool development, right? And he's got his org underneath, right? And when you make when you make this bigger group that's like who's under the CIO, right? Well, you just say, well, I'll make the head of the tool development, his or her group org, just that whole group is nested within that group, right? And then within that that person's group, they have other groups, right? And so you get this nesting because it's natural, because you're not going to find a way to go like, let's just put these individuals into the group into one layer, right? uh, you're going to do that. And so when you do that, then you also have to go to the next layer of how do you get um, AD group members, right? Like, to get those members out through PowerShell, it then becomes interesting, not difficult, just interesting, more entertaining at the very least, especially if you have some people that are directly at it. And that can happen too, right? Because let's say, um, the CIO wants like their administrative assistant, to have the same security access so that they can access all their things and be able to communicate, prepare them for meetings, and et cetera, right? So, like, then you'll have that administrative assistant is just part of the CIO's group, and they're sitting by themselves with the CIO and then all these groups. So then you've got to deal with the layers, right? Um, so yeah, that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some good examples as well. And then also, there's like a lot of like super simple commands. I know some Linux commands also transfer over to PowerShell, so you could do like ls, mkdir. I use like cd, and there's a lot of like you can use shorthand with some of these PowerShell commands too. Like one one of the ones I like to do in reference to like what I was just speaking about. When you want to look at an AD user, you do get dash AD user, and then you put it in a variable. And then if you take that variable and pipe it into get member or pipe it into GM, you can see the structure of that object. You can see what that object is. You can see it gives you a lot of detailed information about that Active Directory object. And this just doesn't pertain to Active Directory. It pertains to any object that you're working with in Active Directory. So GM, not in Active Directory, in PowerShell. So GM helps break down and can help you understand, what am I dealing with right here, and what can I do with it as well, because it'll also display like the methods and properties and all those good things. So another super common one, I think, like you're on a computer and you want to see what the name is, host name. If you just type host name in a PowerShell, and I think you can do the same thing in command prompt.
Well, that's just a general OS thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of a lot of command, a lot of shells, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
but I mean, in the sense, right? From what you're saying, like I think years ago you couldn't do that in PowerShell. It was kind of a pain in the ass to get some of these things. It didn't work. It wasn't as rich as it is now.
yeah.
Um, you'd still be doing stuff in CMD, or then you're getting PowerShell to run stuff in CMD and trying to bring it back in ugly ways.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so
never good.
well, if that's all you've got, then that's all you've got, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're still going to do stuff that's, you're going to make it run in CMD rather than PowerShell.
Right.
That's when you're trying to run, x86, x64 apps off of this. Well, in theory, other apps too. Or hey, I wrote some PowerShell that calls up Python, and I've written some Python that calls up PowerShell. Uh, so there's going to be times you get out of the, the context of whatever language you're writing.
Yeah, I mean, there's as they say, there's a million ways to skin a cat. Do it via PowerShell, do it via VB script, Python, C Sharp. You
Yeah.
name it, you can do it. You can do it 100,000 ways. And right now we just primarily focusing on PowerShell, having some
Yeah.
lighthearted info session. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing too spooky. PowerShell,
And I didn't get on a soapbox today. The listeners will eventually hear me get on the soapboxes and complain about something, and they'll think it's stupid, but it's.
I mean, we all got our complaints about something. I mean, nothing's ever going to be perfect for everybody, especially when it comes to PowerShells. There's always going to be some things you can't do, or that you wish you could do, and unfortunately, unless you're a developer, you kind of stuck for the most part. And I've wanted to try to make my own like kind of PowerShell module or PowerShell command using C Sharp. I haven't ventured down that path yet, Or why would I
You-
do that?
I mean, do you need to when you create the modules, right?
It just depends, like, but even right now I don't even have a real valid reason to do so. So I haven't put myself through that torture yet. So it's definitely, it's going to be torture for me, because I've learned some basics in C# some years ago, and I'm starting to go back over it now. And so, like, right now, it's just, if I try to jump in and try to make a PowerShell command or something using C#, it's going to take me probably a month or maybe a couple weeks to try to even just figure out how to properly structure it in C# for it
Yeah.
to be usable.
It's funny you say that, right? Because I'm looking at, we have a couple of tools that are written in C#, and I'm looking at replacing them with PowerShell. But there's a legitimate reason for this, not because I think PowerShell is a better option than C# from a functional standpoint, right? Where I think the advantage is supportability, right? Like PowerShell has a low barrier to entry, whereas C# has a very high barrier to entry. Um, in cost, in terms of comfort, in terms of understandability. Um, and I'm sure somebody's sitting on here going like, "Why would you say that? C#'s not bad," but it is, and that's why the market pays top dollar for C#.NET developers, right? Because there aren't that many. It's difficult. It takes a lot of work, and then for that person to come, and then you don't have the pipeline you can have with PowerShell. Um, and so as I'm writing stuff, the language matters, right? Like in some instances, yeah, Python is the language to do, right? Because there's a large number of people out there that know it, right? But where it does, there are places it doesn't do well. There are places it does fantastically. Um, so uh, that's not to offend anybody or anything, but like when I'm looking at replacing a tool that exists and it's in one language, and I'm thinking about, if I'm going to replace it, what language am I going to do it? It's a couple of things. One, what are my options, right? In this case, this particular tool, it's written in C sharp, so I could do it in C sharp, or I could do it in PowerShell. Python is not really an option for this tool. And then with that, when I go, what are, if I go, leave teams, leave company, etc., will somebody be able to jump in and manage it when I'm gone, right? And for us in our environment, PowerShell is that option of those two languages that I have for this tool, right? So because there is a nice pipeline now, right? How did that pipeline come to be? Took some time. Yeah, that's another conversation for another time, right? We can talk about pipelining.
Absolutely. It's a lot, especially when it
Not
comes
not
to,
to be confused with piping commands.
right, which you probably confused me on that one. So, but it's a lot. It's a lot that you can do with
Yeah.
PowerShell, and especially different languages. I think that's one of the things that kind of attracted me to PowerShell .NET framework for the most part. So,
All right. Well, we've gone on longer than I think either of us expected, so I think at this point we could cut it. Hope you enjoyed our rantings and ravings, people. Anton, you
yeah,
got anything else to say?
it was fun. Hopefully we were able to benefit somebody and hopefully expand their knowledge. And if you guys got questions, you can catch us on the meetup. You can message the Chicago PowerShell users group. We are also in the Slack, the PowerShell Chicago users group Slack channel.
Mhm.
You can always add us there. And I'm Antoine once again, and that's my cohort Thad. And you got anything else?
Nope, nope. Remember, get help, have some fun. Maybe next time we'll talk about simplicity. Something.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye, all.